She was in the original BBC version of The Office and is a Shakespeare Education Practitioner. Emma Manton. Emma, such a pleasure to be chatting with you today. And I saw that very recently. I thought this was so cool. You performed Henry V twice in a tent, and
Yes.
apparently it was really hot outside, apparently.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a very rare heat wave here in the UK, which we're just not used to. Yes, it was at a history festival where I was working with some friends who assembled this company of actors, and we only assembled for the performances. So we didn't rehearse together; we only rehearsed individually, and we were using what we think Shakespeare's actors would have used, which were Elizabethan cue scripts. So we never had the whole play. We just had our lines and the three words before you speak, which are then rolled into a little scroll, which is your role. So you're given your role. And there's loads of evidence that this is how Shakespeare's actors probably did it because they would never have had time to rehearse if they were doing different plays every night. So we had this really strange experience of learning lines without having the slightest idea what you're responding to or how long there is between each of your lines, or even who you're talking to half the time. And you just have to wait for those three words to be spoken and then you speak. So it was a bit of an experiment before in front of an audience who were history fans and up for the experiment. And it was really interesting.
Now, I've also seen that you are a very avid runner. You like to
Yes.
stay active. How did you get into running?
I my first no my second season with the Royal Shakespeare Company. So the Royal Shakespeare Company, as I'm sure you know, is based in Stratford upon Avon, which is a small town in the Midlands, in the middle of the UK. And the vast majority of actors tend to live in London, or certainly not in Stratford. So when we're performing with the RSC, we have to relocate really to Stratford, and they have all these lovely Elizabethan cottages, and so we all stay in those. And I moved up there the week after my son started his first week at school. So he was at school in London, and I was in Stratford, and I had a terrible dose of mum guilt and thought, right, the only way I can get rid of my mum guilt is if I'm just constantly busy. And one of our actresses, Michelle Terry, who now runs Shakespeare's Globe, was training for her first marathon. So she took me for a run with her, and we did 2 miles, and I had to walk twice, and I was so embarrassed. I thought this was awful. So decided to do something about it. So we signed up for a 10K race, training in Stratford, and then we did a half marathon. And then she met me at the finish line of the half marathon and told me she'd entered a team into the UK's first women's marathon. So we did that, and that was my first marathon. And then it's funny how these things sort of develop a bit of a momentum of their own. I then wanted to run the London Marathon because that goes literally past the end of my street. And the places are quite hard to come by unless you're raising money for charity. And it was at the time that so it was 2016 when I was first applying, and that was when there were a lot of really distressing pictures coming out of Syria. So I decided, right, I'll do something to help these poor people who happen to make this decision to leave their home, and managed to get a place through the UN Refugee Agency. So ended up running for refugees, and had to raise some money and contacted the National Theatre, sort of fully expecting them to say they couldn't help. And they offered me one of the stages, the Littleton stage, which is one of the biggest stages in London, to put on a fundraiser. So I put on a fundraiser there, and it's funny. It's become a bit life-changing over the years. The people I've got to work with through running and fundraising. So Kate Blanchett has been involved, Colin Firth, Keira Knightley, Stanley Tucci, really amazing people who are all goodwill ambassadors for UNHCR. And it all came because I selfishly wanted to run the London Marathon. And then it sort of spirals and you end up doing big things.
And you mentioned running with refugees. It's it's great work that you're doing with that. I mean, just what does it mean to you to be able to really make a positive impact on the world and the lives of others?
It's, well, I think. I mean, all philanthropy, I think, is probably ultimately selfish, but it just allows me to be able to watch the news and live with myself. I'm not going to change the world, but it might make the little part around me a little bit kinder. And that feels like I can live with that.
In what ways, would you say has running overall just changed your life?
Well, there's lots of things. I mean, sort of physically being a bit stronger and a bit healthier is a wonderful thing, but there's being forced to, especially when you start running slightly longer distances, you're forced to spend time in your own company. And that's a challenging place to be sometimes. But I think it's good to have to spend time with your own thoughts. And I've read somewhere, and I think it's true, that there are very few problems or that can't be thought through on a good long run. It just sort of clears, it gives a sense of clarity that it's hard to find anywhere else. It's a sort of active meditation, I suppose, that you're forced to think in a slightly different way. And it I've learnt a lot about my area, the area that I live in. I live in central London, well, on the edge of central London in the original Greenwich, rather than the New York Greenwich. And being down by the river, or up in, some of the old Henry VIII's hunting ground is just up the road from us. And there's loads of roads that I'd passed for years and thought, I wonder what's down there. And now when I'm on my feet, I can go down those roads and just have a look. And some really lovely people. When I'm moving all over the country, working with in different cities, there's always a running group. And they're people I would never meet otherwise. When I was training for my first marathon, I was up in Scarborough in the northeast and ended up training with a man who was 68, training for his 28th marathon. And he'd worked in a print works all his life and loved Scarborough and told me all about it. And we became proper friends, over the hours that you spend pacing up and down the coast. And I can't see any other way that our lives would have crossed other than that. In fact, I had a similar experience in New York. I was running in Manhattan, just right up in the north of Manhattan, and got into step with a lovely man who had moved to New York from Puerto Rico and wanted to show me all the things he loved about his neighborhood. And we ran together for about 5 miles, and then we sort of shook hands and went our separate ways, and it was lovely. So all those things. That's quite a lot, isn't it?
That's awesome. I think it's really cool that you're able to like make those fun connections with people. No, and I'll say this, even though I don't really run a lot, I do love a good walk. I love going on a like pretty much every day. I go on a walk, and it's no, it's really
Yeah.
nice, kind of like you said, to take that time for yourself. And it's I'll be honest, it's actually really good for mental health as well. It's really beneficial.
Yeah, you understand. It's being outside and being on your feet and moving, I think it is everything. And my dad will be 90 next year, and he still walks several miles every day, and I want to be like him when I grow up.
Absolutely. No doubt. I mean, that is awesome. That is awesome. Let's get into your acting journey. Where did the interest in acting first start?
Oh, that's a very good question. I had I've no idea. I grew up in a town called Leicester, and they about 2 years before I was born, the town built a theatre. So in the late 70s. And our next door neighbour was running the box office at the time, or working in the box office. And I think she saw me as a small child showing off in the back garden and said to my parents, you should get her into the youth theatre. So I joined the youth theatre when I was very small. And but then when I was about 8 years old, 8 or 9 years old, we did a summer show where there were four professional actors and the youth theatre played everything else. So probably about 50 young people playing all the parts in this musical for about 6 weeks over the summer. And that was the point when there was no going back really from that for me. once I'd seen that that was a way that people could spend their time, that's what I wanted. Which brought me lovely full circle that last Christmas I did a similar thing for a company in London where I was one of four professionals and the rest of the company was made up of young people. And I saw them having exactly the same experience that I'd had at age 8, of just falling in love with theatre and the sense of community and being part of something. It was lovely.
It's cool that you mentioned that you grew up in Leicester. That's really cool. Do you like Leicester, the football club?
I I really, really wish I was cool enough to know anything about football, but I do. I claim Leicester on those years that we're doing amazing things, and the rest of the time, I'm afraid it falls off my my radar. But no, I'm very proud of Leicester Football Club. Yay, go us!
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I think I mean, there was that one year where where they won the Premier League, and that was like the whole world was talking about that. That was pretty amazing.
Yeah, we're not famous for many things, but we do have that.
Yes, of course, of course. What what were some of your first sort of acting roles that like really stand out to you, like just as you're kind of getting your feet wet?
I had a really varied start because I didn't go to drama school. I went to university and did an English degree, and at my university there was no drama degree. So everyone who was involved in student drama was from all sorts of disciplines. So it was, people studying medicine or history or architecture and a lot of people studying English. And we would be in charge of everything. So there was a wonderful university theatre, but we would program it, we would fundraise for it, we would produce, direct everything, and be in it. And that felt like a lovely training for sort of understanding the diversity of skills that are needed to create this industry. But then I sort of just jumped in with 2 feet and decided I was going to have a go at becoming a professional actor without any credentials really to back me up. And I got a job in the bar at BBC Television Centre. And that was when I had a moment of going, right, okay, I'm in London now. Moved down to the big city. I've got some money coming in. I can now make some decisions. And realised that the bar was on the same corridor as the casting directors. So one day decided to walk down the corridor and introduce myself to one of the casting directors. And it just so happened that the moment I knocked on her door, she'd just had a phone call from one of the producers saying they were doing this new little comedy series and could she have a few actors who could just sort of be around to play these office workers. And then I knocked on the door and she went, oh, there you go. Do you want to do that? And that was The Office. So as that being my first job was just mad that it was this wonderful, exciting, creative thing that felt like it had no stakes, particularly with no sense that it was going to become what it became. And then I ended up doing a children's show for 6 months and toured the States doing a children's show. So it was a really weird mixture of things to go from sort of indie comedy on telly to then suddenly being a mouse in Buffalo in um in a university theatre somewhere.
Wow, how about that? No, it's so crazy how just one little moment can happen, and then they just kind of, and then all the stuff that comes afterward, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty incredible how life can sometimes work out that way.
Yeah, I feel like I'm still all through my career, I've just been seeing what is available for me. I really admire actors who have a sense of they sort of have this plan and things that they want to achieve. And I've never really had a sense of that. I've just had a sense of just saying yes to things and seeing where it takes me. And I feel like I've approached the industry sideways. That just keep it, I just never know what's going to build on what. And somehow I start running, and that takes me to the National Theatre, and then suddenly I'm at the Houses of Parliament, or I'm taking a bar job that's taking me into this enormously successful comedy series. It doesn't make sense, but there's certainly no plan to it, but I'm really proud of it. And I just keep saying yes to things and seeing where it's going to end up. And it's usually quite surprising.
What was that? What was the children's show that you did?
I don't know how popular it is in the States, but every child under the age of 5 in the UK knows the Gruffalo. Do you know that?
Not personally.
No, it's a children's book by Julia Donaldson, and Axel Schaefer did the illustrations, and it's about a mouse who goes for a walk in a wood, and keeps meeting predators, and scares them off by saying, "Oh no, I'm looking for the Gruffalo," and the Gruffalo is really scary, and then finds out that the Gruffalo is real and actually meets the Gruffalo. And it was adapted by a company called Tall Stories, with 3 actors and a couple of trees. And it was a huge success at the Edinburgh Festival. This is many, many years ago. And then they took it on the road, and I joined to go to America with the tour. And it's still touring now. So that's 20 years ago. The same show, it's been hugely successful. And it's just a really lovely physical theatre show with 3 actors.
I'm sure that was pretty fun to work on. Like, yeah, are there any memories like from working on that specifically that kind of stick out to you?
Yes, nothing to do with the theatre. We had we because we were performing in Canada and in the States, so we went sort of as far south as Atlantic City and as far west as not quite to Chicago, and quite a lot around New England. We crossed the border quite a lot, and we were often crossing at Niagara Falls, which is obviously big busy border crossing. But a couple of times we crossed a bit further east, and I remember one one crossing there was we there was someone who really don't think he'd seen anyone for hours, and we came across in our van, and he decided to ask us lots of questions about the show. Couldn't quite understand what we were doing, so in the end he just went, "Well, can you just do a bit?" So we stood there in this border crossing and did a bit of the show so that he could try and understand what we were doing. That was very surreal.
I want to ask you about The Office now. I mean, do you remember what your first day on set was like?
Oh. Well, I did. So we did a week in 2000 where we just did the first episode, which was a pilot. Um, I remember I remember the producer coming up to me and sort of looking at me a bit strangely and going, "It's Emma from the bar. What are you doing here?" That was strange. It was a lot of the time, it felt like working in an office because we were filming, it wasn't a set, it was an office. It's in Teddington Studios, but the studios were sort of they were on their way out even then, and they're not there anymore. So we were just sitting in this office, and maybe 3 or 4 of the computers actually worked. So we were always trying to get the computer that actually worked so that we could play Minesweeper or Solitaire. So it was a lot of sitting at computers, trying to find a way to get our computer into shot, because then it meant if ours was in shot, it had to be plugged in. And then we got um, a computer that worked. It felt very straightforward. And definitely Ricky and Stephen were having, obviously all the pressure was on their shoulders, but they approached it with such humor that I certainly never felt the pressure. And I don't know if anyone did really. It's they certainly never showed it anyway. It always felt like it was just a lot of people making each other laugh.
And like you said, the show was shot at Teddington, but it was in like an actual office. It wasn't in any of the studios, and I'm sure, and it just adds to the authenticity and the realism, of the show. It like it sometimes it may have even felt like you were going into work as opposed to we're making a TV show.
Yeah. Well, we all got the train. We wouldn't those of us that were playing the office workers. would get picked up at Teddington Studios. So we'd all get the train in first thing in the morning and then get the car down there and just with all the other commuters. And we got given a little voucher to go and get our lunch, which was never quite enough for the thing that you actually wanted to eat. So it was very low budget and very low stakes. Or it certainly felt like it to me. I'm sure there was more going on behind the scenes that I didn't see. But because we were always, they were never entirely sure how they were shooting anything until they were shooting it. We were all called all the time. So we were on set a lot, finding ways to amuse ourselves by sitting at a computer and playing Minesweeper. So there is an authentic experience going on behind there, which is a lot of people being forced to sit in a desk and look at a screen, which is what the office environment is, right?
Yeah. I know that the studios, I know they aren't there anymore. Have you ever like just at least gone back to the site just to like reminisce or whatever?
I hadn't been back since the last day of filming until New Year's Eve this year. I was working at Kingston Theatre, which is about 2 miles down the river, and I had no idea how close I was to Teddington Studios until someone mentioned it to me. And I was playing Marion in a production of Robin Hood. And the actor who played Robin Hood was an enormous Office fan. And I was so disappointing to him because every time he would come to me with an Office quote, I had no idea what he was talking about because I haven't seen it for 20 years. But he watches it all the time and he knows all of it. So we decided we were going to see in the new year with a little pilgrimage to the old Teddington Studios. So we walked down and you have to go through a private housing block to get to the river. And then along the river is they've placed blue plaques with the names of some of the famous comedians who filmed at Teddington Studios. So it's all through the 70s and the 80s, the big sort of household names of that time, and The Office is on there. So we took some photos and then we had a little dip in the Thames. We jumped in the river as a little sort of tribute. So yes, I have been back, but how interesting that you asked that. If you'd asked that 6 months ago, the answer was no for 20 over 20 years.
Wow, wow, that is wow. How about that? How about that? There's a lot of history, at that site. I mean, because I believe that's where the Benny Hill show was shot. I know, I'm a huge Rowan Atkinson fan. I believe that's where Mr. Bean was filmed. And Tommy Cooper, oh my gosh, one of my all-time favorites. A lot of his shows were filmed there. There's so much history in at that site, and then The Office is of course a huge part of that. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it was felt very, very lucky to have been sort of straddling two eras. And the comedy that we were doing felt like it was straddling two eras as well, because it's not the Tommy Coopers and you know the that sort of old school stand-up that came from Variety. But and it wasn't really sitcom based. Well, it was sort of the format was sitcom, but it felt like it was becoming something new as well, sort of moving all of that, being the next link in a chain, and that feels lovely.
I believe you said this in like an interview you did sort of back then, because I think you said that in the beginning you thought that The Office would be kind of a cult series, right? Like it wouldn't have like be like this big thing, but then it did blow up. It became this massive success. What was the moment that you realized, wow, this is huge and everyone knows about it?
I did overhear some people talking about it at a bar. I was standing next to them, and there were two people having a conversation where they were trying to work out whether it was a real documentary or not. That was an interesting moment. I don't think I really realized how big it was until about 3 years after we'd done the pilot, and suddenly the first royalty check arrived. And I'd never seen money like that before. That was life-changing money. That I realized people were really behind this and were really buying buying the DVDs. Yeah, I had two big. There was that moment of stood at the bar, hearing some people talk, and then I was going home on the tube one night in a completely empty tube platform and a empty tube carriage, and someone had left behind a TV listings magazine, and I opened it up, and there was a huge photo of all of us, in across two pages in the middle, and I'm in the middle, right in the middle at the back, um, and that's suddenly felt very mainstream that it was in a TV listings magazine in that size rather than just a little footnote. It was the big story. Very slow burn though. I don't. There was no one big moment. And then we kept getting invited to awards ceremonies. I had a moment when I was on the list for some reason. I'm not sure how my name got on the list and not other people's, but that was nice being invited to those things.
Oh, of course, of course. Were there any times where you get where you would get like recognized on the street or stuff, and people would like come up to you or stuff like that?
Very, very, very rarely. I can be sat with the entire cast of The Office and they will recognize everyone except me. I think I like to think it's because I'm completely transformative and a bit of a chameleon, but I don't know what it is. No, I've occasionally, actually, weirdly, more so recently. I don't know whether it's having a bit of a renaissance, or I think it went on Netflix. Maybe some people caught it on Netflix or revisited it. But I've probably had more people recognize me recently from it than at the time. It's weird. I like to think it's because I haven't changed in 20 years. I look exactly the same.
Right on, right on. There you go. Uh, do you have like a favorite episode of the show at all? Or
There's one episode that's it's a training day. Whereas do you
my
know the episode I
yep,
mean?
my favorite. Yep.
Well, I love that anyway because the actor who came in was just so brilliant as the guy doing the training. But practically, it meant we were in a different building, so we had to leave the office, go across the parking lot to another building that was maybe 5 or 6 meters away, and it felt like we were having a trip, sort of a school trip to go somewhere else, to actually be shooting in a different room. Felt huge. Yeah, I like that. And I very much like being in the shot where David Brent does the dance.
Oh, yes, yes. Who can forget that? Just iconic.
Right. Yeah. There's my arm features quite frequently in that. I'm sort of half in the shot of that. It's my proudest moment.
Yeah, of course. And then kind of going, along those lines, in the training episode, that's when David Brent does the performance of a Free Love Freeway, has the guitar and everything. And I believe and I'm pretty sure like during uh his performance, like the camera like actually cuts back to you like quite a few times, like bobbing your head, no, kind of getting into it. And it's yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. I think my character tolerated David Brent pretty well. It is interesting. Look, I mean, I haven't seen much of it in years, but thinking back on it. Because there are some comedies from around that time that haven't aged very well, actually, and we realise that the changing attitudes around some of these conversations just that we don't laugh at the same things we used to laugh at. But then I look at The Office and think, actually, in some ways, they're a little bit that it has stood up because he's what Ricky and Stephen have written is that we're laughing at a sort of the mediocre man who has achieved just by sort of being hanging around for long enough, and is sort of enabled by all the people around him by just sort of letting him be a bit mediocre and just a white man who does stuff. And actually, everyone else does the work around him and just lets him sort of take the credit and bob along. And we've learnt to laugh at that sort of man more since then. So I think they were ahead of their time, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. Just a very entertaining show, and for me, it never gets old. It
Well,
uh,
that's good to hear.
yeah, just one of those very very special shows, And I tell you what, speaking of special, on The Office, you got to work with the late great Ewan McIntosh, one of the greats, truly. What memories do you have from working with him?
We became friends actually for a while after that. We lost touch, um, sadly. Yeah, I have so many memories of you, and the main one being that we were sat next to each other, and we both decided that our character was the head of accounts. But it was we could only confirm that we were head of accounts if we'd managed to get this in shot. So we both had a sign that said "I am head of accounts," and everything was about trying to get that into a shot that was going to be used, because then that meant it was official that we were head of accounts. And I don't think either of us quite managed to do it. So I think I am head of accounts.
It-
And of course, you in that ridiculous Ali G costume will never get old.
yes, yes. Oh my gosh. It's like so amazing. So amazing and
Yeah.
truly a wonderful talent. Um
I worked with him again, actually. We did, he was part of a group called Navel Gazing. I don't know if you know this. There were four of them who used to write together and they did some just hilarious things. They were really, again, really ahead of their time. They did a sort of a webinar, a web series of short short episodes, right at the beginning of YouTube being a thing that was where we were hosting content. And it was, what were they called? Toy Boys. It was a band that had been big as a boy band, and now they were in their late 30s, heading towards their 40s, and were reforming. A little bit like Girls Five Ever, if you've seen that. It was that sort of idea, and that was very funny. And then they wrote a pilot called Cul-de-sac, which was a lot of things that were going on behind closed doors in this very mundane suburban neighborhood. And I was in that, and it was very dark. That was very dark, the things that were going on behind those closed doors, to the point where I'm possibly quite glad it didn't go to series because the things that my character was doing were getting darker and darker. But they wrote some lovely things. And we had a memorial for him last year, and lots of the office people came to that, and we all sort of reconnected in some ways, which has been really nice. Yeah, miss him. He was a good man, a good soul.
Yes, yes, absolutely. No, yeah, yeah. And I think it's really cool that you were able to reunite with some of the other folks from the office, and and have that moment where you're able to celebrate his life and his accomplishments. No, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
What was that? What was that pilot called again? You said cul-de-sac?
Cul-de-sac. It's a suburban street that only has one entrance. So it's like a sort of semicircle of houses. That's a cul-de-sac. So like it Ramsey Street in Neighbours. So you have a sort of semicircle of houses, so everyone can see each other. So it's that sort of idea of a suburban neighbourhood where everyone's twitching behind their net curtains and being aware of what each other are doing. There were some ridiculous characters in these houses that they'd written. It's very funny. And Sterling Gallagher was in that as well. He plays Jennifer in The Office,
Yes.
and
Oh
Jane
wow.
Lucas, who plays Sheila. Yeah, there were a few Office people in it.
I do want to mention a really great short film you did a few years ago. I watched this recently called Arrival of Oliver. You give a very fantastic and emotional performance in this film. What was your experience like making it?
Goodness me, no one's ever seen that as far as I can tell. It's that was an amazing experience because we were filming it under COVID restrictions, with student filmmakers, and we did. My husband is also an actor, so we were allowed to be in two shots together. So we did a few films for the National Film and TV School around that time. I it's so exciting to work with young filmmakers at the beginning of their careers. I'd do it every day if I could, and that was one of those. I've people who haven't managed to be jaded by the industry yet and still have lots of ideas. Yeah, it was a hard-hitting storyline. Um, dealing with the and anything to do with children being hurt, even grown-up children. I find I have to brace myself having, being a mother and having a child. It's very accessible emotionally, and and everything around those years, around sort of 2020 into 2021 and 2022, felt like such a gift, because the industry was we didn't know whether it was coming back. We didn't know what the opportunities were going to be for any of us. So being able to do anything creatively just felt so wonderful, and just such gratitude, and especially, young filmmakers who are learning their craft. Wonderful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was, I think your performance in this short film, it really speaks to your acting talent because your part is on you're on like a phone call, I believe, and you're having to make this scene work, mostly by yourself, and you do an amazing job, and then and it's just you doing it, and you do a wonderful job. It really, really speaks to your talent and your great acting.
That's no, that's kind of you. Thank you. It's there was I mean we shot it a couple of times. Once when a few times when it was just me by myself, and then we did add the actor on the other end of the phone call. Um, and I did the same for him when he was filming his end of the call, which helped.
I want to ask you about because I mentioned at the top of this that you're a Shakespeare Education Practitioner. Like, how did this role kind of come about for you?
I joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, doing my first Shakespeare for the Royal Shakespeare Company in 2014. I'd been there previously, being hanging from the ceiling, being a circus performer, but that's another story. But I did a season in 2014 into 2015. Um, we did two Shakespeares and a new play, and the education team recruit freelance practitioners from the acting company. So there's a team of freelancers who have all been actors or directors or voice practitioners within the company. And I was just so lucky that I hit a moment when they had quite a big recruitment drive. And it's it's been some of the most meaningful work I've ever done. So I've been doing this for 10 years now, and over time, the RSC have trusted me more and more with leading projects and leading bigger projects, and international projects now as well. So I work quite a lot in the States. We have partnerships in New York, in New Jersey, in Minnesota. Then we have partnerships in China, in Singapore, where we're working with students, sharing rehearsal room practice to make Shakespeare, for one, make it make sense and make it accessible, but also to find ways that Shakespeare's plays can speak to the sorts of things that we want to talk about now. And that's what I find really exciting. So we have a network of schools all over the UK. Who are RSC partner schools, and they work in clusters around a local theatre. So there's a lead associate school who works with the theatre, and then they recruit a cluster of sort of between 12 and 15 schools, and it's a lot of primary schools, middle schools, secondary schools, and sometimes special needs schools as well. And they get a year-round program from us. So we go and work with teachers, sharing the work. We work with the students, and then every year they do a playmaking festival where we take one of the plays, whichever play it is, and we split it into sections, and each school takes a section, and then they all come together in their local theatre, and we put on the whole play. And it's been so rewarding. And it's all schools, and this is a government term, not my term, in areas of cultural deprivation, which has never felt like a hugely respectful term, but that's the term that they use. So it's students that wouldn't naturally be expected to access the facilities of the Royal Shakespeare Company. So we take it to them, and it's all publicly funded by the government, and really changes things. It connects with students wouldn't who need a different way of learning. So a lot of traditionally the way that Shakespeare's taught in schools, and I'm sure it's the same in the States, is that a teacher will hand over the text. And you look at this text, and the vast majority of students, even students who love Shakespeare, will have to have an intake of breath and a bit of a, oh boy, here we go moment with that amount of text. Whereas the way that we work um, practically with young people is by putting the text aside to start with and getting up on our feet and maybe speaking the text before we read it or finding what it feels like in our bodies, making some being on a shipwreck or a weird sister in Macbeth or trying out some of these words and what the feelings are like before we start to look at big swathes of text. That was a long answer to a question, but I could talk about this forever. um, I'm very proud of it.
Of course, of course. What are what are the most rewarding parts about about being able to work with children and share Shakespeare with them?
It can, what I find really exciting. Well, there's lots of things, but one, it becomes this wonderful leveler, and because everybody finds Shakespeare challenging, some people more than others. But when you're working with children with all sorts of levels of English, all sorts of levels of literacy, everyone's the same somehow when we're coming onto this because we're all learning it for the first time. So that feels really exciting that we create a communal experience. But also, I love that it can be a bit of a Trojan horse for just sneaking conversations into the classroom at this wonderful remove. So if we're just talking about why does Viola feels safer presenting as a boy in when she turns up in this new place. We're not talking about anything other than Shakespeare. But still, we're talking about the feelings of someone who feels more comfortable presenting in a different way without having to say we're explicitly having that conversation. We're just examining something that someone wrote 400 years ago. So those moments I feel so exciting that it can open a conversation that would be triggering or maybe not welcome. I mean, especially, said this, I know there's the debates around what should be in the classroom, particularly where you are, is huge right now. But we all seem to have agreed that Shakespeare's okay and that we can study Shakespeare. So we can talk about race, we can talk about gender, we can talk about all sorts of things through what Shakespeare was writing 400 years ago. And it feels safer somehow. It just feels that everyone can breathe. And I find that really exciting.
Yes, absolutely. Very well said. Very well said. Um, and then as you also as as you mentioned earlier, you're also a mom, which is which is wonderful. What's that journey been like for you, being a mother?
Um, being a mother within the industry has been um, a real journey. So my husband and I are both actors, and I haven't seen many women on my level of the industry managing to maintain an acting career alongside parenting easily. So I felt a little bit like we've been forging our own path to a certain extent. I've worked with many fathers on the same level as me, but I've often found over the years I'm the only mother. And it does feel it's changing, which is really exciting. I got very involved with the equity, with the acting union to see what we could do about that. And the big question was really, what do we want? Because none of us knew. We don't know what does family friendly practice look like within the theatre. We don't really know. So we've trialed all sorts of things over the years. There's been about looking at whether there might be the possibility of job shares, whether that could be a thing. And certainly in long running musicals, there's no reason why that can't happen, and it has happened subsequently. Whether publishing rehearsal schedules in advance is a thing. But we've found we've relied heavily on favours. So either favours from our family, although they don't live near, they have to come and stay with us, or other actors. And I'm trying now to pay it back. So now that my son's 15 next week, so he's much older and doesn't need that intensive childcare that he used to. So now I'm trying to be that person for other friends coming through. So, meeting someone for a coffee so I can push the buggy so they can go for an audition, that sort of thing. Or I used to look after a friend's daughter when she was in rehearsals. Yeah, finding things are changing, but we need to keep talking about it, I think, to find out what we want, really.
Yeah, yeah, right on, for sure. Now, last question here. What is the biggest piece of advice that you have for aspiring actors?
Just say yes to things. It doesn't all have to be the dream job, and it doesn't all have to be in heading towards a thing because the industry just doesn't work like that. It doesn't, one thing doesn't automatically lead to another. If someone asks you to do something and you think it might be fun, say yes. Even if it's doing Henry V in a field in a tent in a heat wave, or something that's just sort of sideways from what you think. Someone said, come and help me assist me directing this show. I'm not a director, that's not my thing, but say, yeah, actually, yeah, I will. And you never quite know where they're going to go. So if it seems interesting, say yes, even if it's not on the plan. Is that good advice? I think that's good advice.
I would agree that that is some great advice. You know, no, because something that I learned in my life is sometimes the best thing you could do is just go for it. Because
Yeah.
because at least in my experiences in life, I've always found out that doing something and then like I'd rather do something and then afterwards be like, that wasn't so great than just not do it at all, right?
Well, it's like being in a rehearsal room, isn't it? You say the worst thing you can do is not offer anything. If you try something and it doesn't work, then you've learned that that doesn't work. And that's a great thing. You didn't know that 10 minutes ago, but now you do. So that it moves you forwards. I think, and probably the best advice is don't listen to too much advice. Just do things your way. There's no set path in this. Everyone's come at it in a different way. So find yours and figure it out.
Yeah, yes. Everyone has their own unique journeys. So,
Yeah. And if someone sends you an email saying, "Do you want to come and talk to me on my podcast?" then say yes, because you might have a very nice chat.
thanks, Emma. That I do appreciate that a lot. And being able to talk with you today, I mean, such an honor and a privilege, and it was wonderful talking with you.
You too. You too. Thank you.